Well, first of all, I thought about Googling Batman dick, but then I just thought that was going to be a rabbit hole I did not want to go down.
Welcome to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through... I'm going to fucking start over. God damn it. Welcome to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through various segments. You can find us at thenerdspodcast.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter through our handle at thenerdspodcast. If you'd like to reach us directly, including sending us suggestions for our nerd favorite segment, you can email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. Additionally, we have a YouTube page under the Nerds You're Looking For banner, and each of us have a Letterboxd account, which is basically social media for watching movies. I'm at that Tyler Hunt, and my co-host Pat can be found at the Nerds Podcast. With all of that being said, and without further ado, alongside me, as always, is my co-host, Mr. Pat Attack. How's it going, man?
I'm good. It's been kind of a busy day, but I'm glad that we are recording a little bit earlier than we normally do. I know you got a trip planned, don't you?
Yeah. I leave tomorrow afternoon when we would typically record.
Yeah, so I've been hanging out with my wife all day. She had an art festival. I don't know if I've talked about this before on the podcast, but my wife has an actual talent other than just like speaking into microphones. Like that's pretty much my only talent. She's an actual artist, and every once in a while she has like these art shows that I try to like help her with. So that's what we did all day, and then it was kind of funny because we were sitting at her booth, and she was like, "Well, why are you guys recording Saturday? Like, why aren't you recording Sunday like you normally do?" And I was like, "Yeah, Tyler's going out of town, like he's flying somewhere." And she's like, "Well, where's he going?" I was like, "I don't know. I don't think I asked."
That about sums it up. That about sums up our friendship anymore. We don't ask, don't tell. Save it for the podcast and all that good stuff.
So, I mean, where are you going?
I wasn't going to tell you. No, we're taking our what has almost become annual trip to Disney World this week. So my wife and I leave tomorrow, and then my sister-in-law and her fiance are meeting us Tuesday for a few days of the trip. So should be a lot of fun. I mean, I've talked about it on the podcast before. It's kind of our thing, so we like it a lot.
Yeah, I think we're gonna do that next year. Is that when the Star Wars thing opens up?
Yeah, there's no way we're doing it next year, man. There's no way we're gonna go when that shit opens up. It's gonna be so crazy.
I think we should go though. For sure.
For the podcast. We should get a sponsor by then that will pay for us to go.
We're never going to get a sponsor. No one is ever going to listen to a second of this and be like, yeah, I'm going to give those guys money.
Yeah, it's like, so you guys are a podcast that curses pretty regularly, and you want us to send you to Disney World. Yeah, I don't think
I don't know,
work.
Man. I know you probably already know this, but my wife has never actually been to Disney World, so there's a thing.
I for some reason I almost asked. I thought for some reason she had never been on a plane, but that wouldn't make sense because I know you guys go to Vegas.
Yeah, so she's been on a plane, but she's never actually been to Disney World before or Disneyland. So she doesn't like. It's not like she's an OG Disney fan. She only goes to land. No, she just doesn't. She's never been to either one of them.
I think that she'd like it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Her family's weird. Like her mom's never been on a plane. That's a thing.
Oh yeah. Why go to Disney World when you have Posey County, Indiana?
Yeah, for sure. Like it's so much better. It's the Disneyland of Indiana.
That is not even true. It's the Knott's Berry Farm of Indiana. Or maybe that's two deep cuts. Maybe I should have said Universal, but not Disney.
I don't know why you have such bad blood for Universal. It's actually pretty fucking cool. I don't know if they still have the Jaws ride, but I loved that when I was
No, they took away the Jaws ride, at least in Orlando.
How do you know that? You've never actually been there.
I keep up with it. Just it's like a gang rivalry. It's like you got to know your enemy.
That's so weird. You've never been there, but you keep up with it.
I don't know how that's
crazy
weird.
People do.
No, just well, yeah. I would say people that are crazy about Disney are in fact probably certifiably insane. Like I don't know, man. The culture around Disney and these theme parks and like the rivalry between Disney World and Universal goes deep. Like I've gotten to some dark places on the internet. It's weird. That's
stupid. That's just really, really stupid. Like it's enjoyable. Both of them are fun.
Yeah, but why waste any of your time on your vacation at Universal when you can just stay at Disney?
That makes no sense because they're both fun. Oh, so you're basically saying why waste time having fun
when you can have better fun?
I don't think that's a thing. No, I don't think you can have better fun.
If I was a huge Harry Potter guy like you are, I would be all over Universal, but really the only thing that's intriguing to me at this point would like the Jurassic Park ride looks cool and the Simpsons stuff, but besides that, I don't know that it's up my alley too much.
So I think I've been to Disney World 3 or 4 times, and I don't know if this is Disney World or if it's Universal. I want to say it's probably Universal. There is a show that is kind of like a stuntman show where they kind of show you how to do stunts and they get volunteers. And I think I've seen the show 2 or 3 times, and my dad has literally been in the show twice. I don't know how he pulled it off, but he's been in the show twice.
They used to have something at Hollywood Studios called it was Lights Action something, and it was like a car stunt show. So I don't know if that would be it or not. And then the Indiana Jones Spectacular at Hollywood Studios is kind of like a stuntman show, and they take volunteers. But
that might have been it.
Yeah, if that's not ringing a bell, it would probably be at Universal. I don't know.
But I think we've gone a little too long with the Disney World. I don't even know where the fuck we got there, how we got there. But that's not normally how we start each episode. We like to break up each of these episodes into different segments. And the first segment is just kind of us checking in with each other. We don't get to have these nerdy conversations as much as we used to. So we kind of like to use this first segment, which we call What We're Into, as just kind of checking in with each other. So what are you into this week?
So I watched the new show on Showtime called Kidding. That's the show that stars Jim Carrey, Judy Greer, Catherine Keener, and Frank Langella. If you're not familiar, it follows a character named Jeff Pickles, who is the character played by Jim Carrey, the main character, and he's kind of a Mr. Rogers type kids TV show host. He's been on the air for 30 years, and he's basically a household name. In the first episode, the first thing we see is he goes on Conan, so he's a relatively big star, but he's also a bit of a saint. He only uses the money he needs, that he makes. The rest of it he donates. He doesn't curse. He's a pretty naive guy, all of that kind of stuff. And with all of that being said, Mr. Pickles is starting to unravel a little bit, and that's where we kind of pick up with the show. The reason why is because a year prior, his son dies in a car crash, and since then he and his wife end up separating, and he slowly starts making pretty irrational decisions, and he's obviously struggling with his life at this point. And for me, I didn't know a ton about this show going into it. I thought that it was going to be about a children's show host that goes insane pretty much, but instead this show is actually kind of tragic. As you watch it, there are 2 episodes available now. Once this podcast comes out, there will be 3 episodes available. But as you watch it, you find yourself really rooting for Jeff Pickles because at his core, like I was saying, he's a really good person. I mean, he is basically, like I said, playing Mr. Rogers. And if you go back a few episodes and listen to the Would You Be My Neighbor documentary retrospective that I did and what we were into, Mr. Rogers is pretty much a saint. So him playing that character, it's hard not to root for him. So with that being said, it's pretty tough because you want him to be okay. And he, like I said, he starts making really bad decisions for his family and for himself. And he's obviously been put through the ringer, and it's pretty disappointing to see what the character is mentally going through. And I think that that's a testament to Jim Carrey's performance, which I'll get to in a second. But with all of that being said, this isn't a drama. It is a dramedy. So it's not all sadness and watching a train wreck. There's also a lot of black comedic elements. So the story is told in a really entertaining way with some moments that are genuinely funny. But overall, watching someone try to stay positive as everything in their life unravels is pretty cringeworthy at times, but they are able to layer in a level of humor that makes it bearable to a certain extent and, even enjoyable in a few places. So like I was saying, I think a lot of what makes this show work can be attributed to its cast. So they got a great ensemble for this show. I didn't realize the cast that they had. I just knew Jim Carrey was in it going into it. But, not only is he, of course, great, but Judy Greer is amazing as always. Catherine Keener is a great actress. And then the person who really steals the show for me is Frank Langella. Like, he kills it on this show. So overall, great performances all around. I'm sure this show is going to continue to get more and more tragic and more dark as the season progresses. We're only a couple episodes in, but just like a train wreck, you can't look away. And I definitely plan on keeping up with this show.
So I, like you, didn't really know anything about this show. I saw something about him going on Conan, and I've seen the Jim and Andy documentary, and I think I actually might have talked about it on the podcast. And for me, he kind of comes off like a dickhead in that documentary, like Jim Carrey does. And so I've kind of lost touch with what he's doing because I kind of feel like he might be an asshole, like as a performer. And he's just kind of a weird guy. So I don't know. I just haven't stayed with his career since then. And he just kind of rubs me the wrong way. And when I first saw this, I got a completely different vibe, and maybe this is more about the promo material than the show because I haven't watched any of this show, but I just assumed it was one of those, like, he plays this character on TV, but he's the exact opposite of that in his personal life. Like, he's this guy that's supposed to be this Mr. Rogers character, like you said, but then is like picking up hookers or something like that. Like, just complete opposite than the character that he plays on TV. But it sounds like it's completely different. I was getting that vibe because, like you said, it sounds super, super tragic, and he's kind of losing his mind because of the things that have happened in his personal life. So I'm kind of glad that it's different than what I thought it was going to be. But because I kind of have that biased opinion about Jim Carrey now, I probably won't watch the show, even though it does kind of sound interesting.
Yeah, I definitely get where you're coming from with that. He's definitely lost his mind, it seems like, over the last 10 or 15 years. It's kind of weird. And maybe he was always that way and you just didn't see people's personal lives in the 90s because of the lack of social media, but he definitely seems like a pretty weird dude.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool, man. What are you into?
So I am into a show. I don't know if we officially reviewed it or if it was just something that we went into a lot of depth when one of us talked about it for what we're into, but I want to talk about the second season of American Vandal, which is a Netflix mockumentary series, which I loved the first season. Like I said, I don't know if we officially reviewed it or not, but what really caught me off guard with the first season of that show is just how good of a mystery it is. Like, get past the dick humor, and that show is really, really funny. There's a scene where and I think I probably mentioned this a couple of times when we talked about it, but there is a scene where they recreate this hand job at summer camp, and it's so fucking funny. Like, I was pretty much in tears. And so I was a little nervous going into the second season because I don't know how you follow that up. Like, such a cool concept that should have been like a one note joke. Essentially, they were able to make into a really interesting first season. So I don't know if that's something that you can really follow up. But then I saw the trailer for the second season, and man, mostly because I'm a child, but the fact that the person that they're trying to essentially catch is called the turd burglar. It made me laugh. Like, they say it so much that eventually you get desensitized to it, but the first couple episodes, pretty much every time they said it, I laughed. And my wife, it got to the point where my wife literally looked over and she's like, "Are you gonna laugh every single time?" And I was like, "I'm pretty sure I'm gonna laugh every time because it's so fucking funny to me." But essentially, the concept of the show is they're taking the two people, the main characters, Sam and Peter, I believe their name is. They're taking them from season 1, and they basically are on another case. And what's different from season 2 versus season 1 is the fact that they're actually doing it at a different school. So they're actually, they've really kind of, I don't know, kind of grasp onto the meta concept of it. And they've actually literally, their show has been bought by Netflix, which is kind of meta. Well, it's super meta because this show is on Netflix. And so Netflix is basically wanted them to make another season. So they've been kind of getting requests over and over again for all these other cases that they can take, and they weren't really interested in any of them until they get the turd burglar, which again I'm probably gonna have a hard time saying without laughing. They get the request from the school, I believe it's in Seattle, and so they have to fly across the country, which I don't know if it's, I don't want to say it's to the detriment of this season because it's still a really, really solid season. But what I thought really carried the first season, other than being really funny and being a really good mystery, is the fact that it's really personal for these two because it's the school that they actually attend. Well, in season 2, it's not the school that they attend, so they don't really know these people, and so it's not quite as personal. So they're not the focal point of, not that they were necessarily the focal point of season 1, but season 2, they're basically always behind the camera. There's very, in relative to the first season, there's very little Sam and Peter in season 2, which is, it's different, which I get. Like, you have to distance yourself a little bit from season 1. You don't want to just make like Hangover Part 2, which is just a carbon copy of that first movie. You don't want to do anything like that. But at the same time, it's like you still want to have the core of the show, which ultimately I think they do. I was just slightly disappointed with that. I will say that the mystery in this show is just as good in the second season as it is in the first season. Of course, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the last 2 episodes, I mean, just really, really awesome. Just really good. Like, I mean, they take making a murderer and like keepers and stuff like that to a whole new level. Like, I would almost put some of this like mystery and true crime drama up with those types of actual documentaries. So, and I'm glad that I kind of brought up the keepers because I feel like they were kind of, they did making a murderer in the first season, and they still have that vibe in the second season, but because the Keepers is about a Catholic school, and I failed to mention this in my little synopsis, but the school that they go to is a Catholic school, so I feel like they kind of have the Keepers feel in the second season as well, so I thought that was kind of a clever move as well. So not quite as good as the first season, but I definitely think that they put all of my anxiety about them doing a second season to rest within like the first episode.
Yeah, so Brittany and I started watching this the other night. We watched, I think, 2 episodes. We actually started it on our anniversary, like right after I grilled us a couple of ribeyes and like we were having a nice dinner, and then people started shitting everywhere. And I looked at my wife and I was like, "Do you want me to turn this off?" And she's like, "No." She's a sucker for poop jokes, but who isn't? But yeah, so far I'm really digging it. It's one of those things where you don't imagine they're going to strike gold twice. So it's good to hear that the rest of season 2 holds up, because that's, you said it when you were talking about season 1. Like, I think the poop joke angle could probably get pretty old by episode 10. So I'm really glad to hear that it continues to be solid throughout the rest of the season, and I'm excited to pick it back up with Brittany.
For sure. And I want to share this really quickly. People on Facebook are really stupid. And I saw this thing getting shared around by some of my, I would say, more naive friends. It's just like viral marketing for season 2 of American Vandal. And they show a bit from that show. And I saw somebody sharing it on Facebook like it was a real thing. And I almost commented on his post, and I was like, nah, I'm just going to let him think it's a real thing. Like, you know that this is from American Vandal, right? Like, I was going to post that. I was like, you know this is from a TV show, right? And I was like, I'm just going to let it go.
Dude, that shit happens all the time. I saw that on my timeline as well. People are really dumb. You were right.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But if you haven't already, and you've seen the first season and you like the first season, I would definitely suggest watching the second season if you haven't already.
Cool. Awesome.
All right. So our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tyler and I read a ton of comics each week, and we'd like to spotlight one or two. So what'd you read this week?
I read the Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1, but it's actually like #1, Volume 4, #1 or something like that. So the title of this annual is Ties That Bind, and it was written by Saladin Ahmed, and it was drawn by Gary Brown. So I think I've talked about it on the podcast a few times, but I've really come to love annuals over the last few years. They almost always tell an interesting story. Sometimes it ties into what's going on in the main continuity of the series at the moment, and sometimes it's a completely one-off story that delves deep into some topic or corner of the universe of whichever character it kind of centers around. I know last year I mentioned that my favorite comic of the year was an annual, and while I don't know that I'd say this comic is my favorite of the year necessarily, it was really, really good. So this annual in particular ties into Spider-Man's past and examines one period of time in particular that hadn't been delved into a whole lot until now, and that's Spider-Man's first few nights after acquiring the black symbiote suit from his time off-world in Secret Wars during the 80s, as we all know. So if you remember back to those issues, Spider-Man gets the suit, and after coming back to Earth with it, part of the problem is that he was sleeping all the time, and he felt as though the suit was taking his body out for like a joyride while his mind was asleep. And they actually show that in the Spider-Man 3 movie a little bit, where Peter wakes up hanging from a building in the black suit. So this story dives into what happened during those excursions. It's kind of cool because the narrator of this issue is the symbiote, which speaks somewhat like in disembodied voice that and it talks like the true parasite it is. The sad part, however, is that this book almost makes you sympathetic for the symbiote. Even though the black suit is doing things in a super violent way, it's basically doing it to take care of Spider-Man and make him better, and its purpose just isn't to feed off of him. He like wants to, I don't want to say impress Peter, but he wants to make Peter happy. And he wants to do it by letting Peter rest while he goes out and he does these things for him. And so it's kind of a weirder take on it than what we're used to with like the symbiote story and how Eddie Brock gets the suit and becomes Venom and all that stuff. So at the end of the day, like it's a pretty cool balance, and it ends up adding a lot of layers to how crushed and hurt and angry the symbiote is when Peter forcefully removes it before it bonds with Eddie. So it definitely adds to that kind of tension between Venom and Spider-Man as well, and adds to that backstory a little bit too. So overall, it's a really great story, and the art is fantastic. It's a blend of contemporary artwork with the style of the 80s, since it's supposed to take place right after Secret Wars. Plus the variant cover that I ended up getting, it's, I think, cover B, is fucking awesome, and it's wall worthy. So I definitely recommend picking this one up.
Yeah, so I've mentioned this before. I get Amazing Spider-Man for Marvel.com, so I'm a little bit behind, but it doesn't sound like this is a book that I necessarily need to be caught up on because it is, like you said, an annual. And I'm kind of curious if they went this route, and we've talked a lot about this before, like if there's a new movie or a TV show, a lot of times a comic will come out that is either based on those characters or kind of relevant to this new thing. And of course, we're going to get the Venom movie here shortly. So I wonder if I'm sure that they did this on purpose, and I wonder if their attempt to make the symbiote more sympathetic is because Venom's gonna be the hero in that movie. He kind of has to be. So I wonder if this is like their first real effort to kind of put that in some people's heads. Cause of course, not a ton of people are going to read this book, relatively speaking to how many people are going to go see Venom, but at least put that kind of in the back of people's heads to begin with before they even see the movie.
Yeah, I mean, that thought obviously crossed my mind too whenever I saw that was the story they went with for the annual this year. So I think you're right on the money. I think that's exactly why they did it. With that being said, for me, it adds more to the comic book lineage than it does to my mindset around the Venom movie. I still think that that's a poor choice, but you're right. They're cashing in on it. They do it all the time. So
yeah, for sure.
So what'd you read, man?
So Tyler did not read the Batman book this week. It feels weird because, I mean, we're both big Spider-Man fans. We're both big Batman fans, but I think we could both agree that you're the bigger Batman fan and I'm the bigger Spider-Man fan. And we kind of just flipped this week. So I'm going to talk about the big Batman book that, started this week. It's a Batman mini series called Batman Damned. And it was written, and the art were done by the two guys, and I'm going to butcher both of their names, so I apologize right off the bat. So it was written by a guy named Brian Orizzo, sort of. I guess that's how you pronounce his name. And then the artwork was done by Lee Bermejo. Nope, not
Woof.
close. Yeah, that was really bad. Like, I was like, I think I just need to, I thought about this before I started this segment. I was like, I just need to go with it. Like, just have confidence. And then I went the opposite way. But anyways, and a lot of people are talking about this book because something really stupid. You see Batman's dick in this book, and it's like blowing up on the internet right now. And there's actually a lot of really funny tweets about it. But anyways, it's so weird because I was at this art festival today with my wife, and I read it on Comixology. I've been reading a lot, especially books like this where I don't know if I'm going to keep up with it. I'll buy it on Comixology, and if I think it's worthy, then I'll go get a physical copy and I'll kind of pick up with it, on physical copy, but I don't want just have a bunch of random number ones in my collection. So I was reading it and I got to the end and my wife was like, "Oh, how was it?" I was like, "Well, it was kind of disappointing." She's like, "Well, why?" And I was like, "Because I didn't get to see Batman's dick." Because it turns out that DC censored the digital copies for some reason. I don't know why you would do that. Like, if you were going to censor it, why wouldn't you censor, like, just don't let them put it in there? So it was very weird. And so, of course, as one must do, I had to look it up on the interwebs because
just out of curiosity, what'd you Google to find it?
I Googled, well, first of all, I thought about Googling Batman dick, but then I just thought that was going to be a rabbit hole I did not want to go down. And so I Googled Batman Damned, I think dick or something like that. I want to say dick pic, but I don't think I Googled dick pic. No, I think something like that. And then immediately, like, a bunch of stories popped up, but then I, of course, went to images and I saw it and it's so weird because there's a couple of panels that could have been. That's how weird this book is that it's a couple of panels that it could have been. And then, of course, it's the most obvious panel. But, I think that it says a lot about this book that I've talked about it for a couple of minutes, and this is the only thing that we've talked about. And I really honestly, I kind of briefly said this to you before we started recording, but if you don't see Batman's dick in this book, nobody talks about this book. Because I can't, what is the imprint called? I think it's a Black Label is what the imprint is called. And it clearly, this book clearly wants to be The Killing Joke or Batman or Dark Knight Returns. Like that type of, this ultra dark and gritty type of book. And it just doesn't work for me. It's almost like, and we say this a lot, and I apologize, this is going to sound super cliche, but it just feels like it just throws a bunch of stuff up against the wall to see if it's stuck. Like, so Batman, this book starts off and Batman's just like on his deathbed. Like he is just beaten up. He's such in bad shape that he can't really remember what happened. And you see that a lot in not just Batman books, but in superhero books in general. And it turns out they end up pulling a body from the river. And you're led to believe that it's Joker's body. Now, I have my reservations about whether or not that's true. It could be true because this doesn't affect Batman, the mythology around Batman at all. That's the point of this imprint. But you are led to believe that it's Joker. So you're already starting off with something like Batman's really beaten up, Joker's dead, and he's being helped. And the narrator in this book is John Constantine. So it's just like they kind of just threw a bunch of stuff together in this book. And all that sounds really cool. It just, nothing really actually happens in this book. It just feels like they just had a narrator saying super vague things, and Batman kind of just does Batman things, and you see his dick. And that's pretty much all that happens in this book. And it's almost like I got to the end of it and I was like, did I miss something? I mean, other than the dick pic, did I miss something? Because it didn't feel like anything happened. And I started to kind of like go back and not really reread it, but just kind of like skim it to see if I missed anything. And I really didn't. There's not a whole lot of depth to this book.
Bro, you had me at Batman's dick.
I know. I know you're gonna watch, or you're gonna read this book because you're gonna want to see the dick pic.
I've seen the dick pic, bro, and I was really hoping.
It's weird that you've not read the book, but you saw the dick.
I wish that I could like say, hey, at least Batman and I both hang to the same side or something, but he is sharply curved right, and I definitely dressed to the left, so that was disappointing for me. But yeah, I mean, that's all I got out of that was it's the Batman penis book. Like it's all over the place.
Yeah, that's what this book is going to be known for. And I mean, at the very least, now we know why he dresses up like a bat and has this really cool car, because he's definitely overcompensating for something.
He wasn't that small, but you would think
he was kind of tiny.
You would think that Batman would have a giant dick. At least that's how I imagine it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure you've imagined it quite a lot.
You have no idea.
I'm uncomfortable with how long we've talked about his dick.
I was getting ready to say, I wonder how long we could go if we really wanted to, just on Batman dick jokes.
See, like, I feel like this would be a good episode to have, like, YouTube stuff, like, because you can look, when you post a YouTube video, you can look at when people stop watching. And I feel like if we had that for podcasts, immediately when we started talking about Batman's dick, like the little graph is just going to go completely down. Like we have lost everyone at this point.
No, man. In the show notes, we need to put the timestamp of when we start talking about Batman's dick to see how many people just skip to that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay. You ready for nerd news, or do you want to stay on Batman's dick? Pun intended.
Well, I mean, given that choice.
Cool. So let's just jump into nerd news. Obviously, the biggest story this week outside of Batman's dick was that we got the first trailer for Captain Marvel, which is obviously a pretty big deal. I know you posted it to our Facebook, or you may not posted the trailer. You posted the frame of Blockbuster. But either way, I know you watched this one, I'm assuming. So what'd you think?
I really liked it. I thought it was really, really cool. I know some people are being weird about like her not smiling that much, which I thought is just such a weird fucking thing to dislike about it. And of course, everybody is freaking out about her hitting the old lady, which I feel like anybody that knows Marvel Comics knows why she hits that old lady. Like, I saw articles about, like, explaining to people why she hits the old lady. And I'm just like, that's so obvious to me. And I hope that doesn't come off like I'm being pretentious, like I'm better than everybody else because I know this thing. But I just feel like, even in the MCU, like, I feel like you should know by now what's going on with this movie. I don't think that they've kept it a secret what's going to happen in this movie. So I'm really, really excited. I think it looks really, really awesome. It has a lot of different things that, like, there's just the shots of the different, I don't want to say points in her life, but there's just so much in this one trailer that I think could lead to a really interesting movie, or it could be a hot mess. I mean, I of course want it to be a really interesting movie, but it definitely has that potential of also not being great. But I guess that's the chance you take with every movie.
Yeah, I think there's no way this movie's not great. I think that the trailer looked amazing. I think Brie Larson looks like a badass. Like, it's such a weird culture we live in where we're bitching that she doesn't smile enough, and we're complaining about her hitting an old lady, where it's like pretty obviously tied to the whole fucking point of the movie, which is the Skrull invasion, which it just doesn't, like you said, even if you don't know the comics and that's brand new to you, you don't see that trailer and think that this hero's going around smacking ladies in the face. So it doesn't make sense to me. But either way, I think the trailer looks really good. I think that it's going to be awesome. Like, it's definitely, like, when we get to our Rotten Tomatoes draft for next year, it's going to be high up on my list of movies to take because I think that it's going to knock it out of the park.
Yeah, for sure. And I will mention, I thought the blockbuster thing was really cool because it just immediately, in such a simple, easy way, it immediately tells you, oh, this is in the 90s.
Yeah. I mean, it sets the time frame perfectly. So unless it's that one blockbuster that's still open in Alaska.
I thought it was in Oregon. I thought the one in Alaska closed down.
Oh, I have no idea. It sounds like you follow Blockbuster a lot closer than I do.
It's weird that I know that. No, it's a thing with John Oliver. Russell Crowe is having his weird divorce auction thing, and he was like auctioning off a bunch of stuff from his movies, and John Oliver, his TV show, bought a bunch of stuff and sent it to the Blockbuster in Alaska to have like a little like weird Russell Crowe like museum in their Blockbuster. It was a whole thing, and then like a month later that Blockbuster shut down.
So what happened to the Russell Crowe stuff?
I don't know. That is a question we all need to answer.
That sounds pretty funny though. That show's really good, but I obviously haven't kept up with it. Cool. So speaking of shows, there are rumored shows coming to the Disney streaming service once that launches next year. So it sounds like both Loki and Scarlet Witch are going to get standalone miniseries on the Disney streaming app. And the impression that everyone has is that Elizabeth Olsen and Tom Hiddleston will reprise their roles for these TV shows. So pretty cool. I don't know. I mean, they must be prequels though, because spoiler alert.
Yeah, because they're dead.
Yeah, both characters died.
They're both dead, so they got to be prequels.
Yeah.
But how could the Scarlet Witch be a prequel though? Because we've seen her from the moment she got her powers until the moment she died.
It's just her living her shitty life before she got her powers on whatever country that was.
Yeah, so it's just like a Full House thing. That's a different Olsen. Never mind.
Good try. Okay, so the last two stories I have are just kind of things that I thought were interesting. It's not really like our typical stories that we talk about. The first is that Seth Rogen blew everyone's mind this week when he told everyone that in the old Duck Hunt game, that the second player controller controlled the duck. And nobody fucking knew that. I didn't know that. Did you know that?
I did not know that. I used to play that game all the fucking time. And I wish that I had known that, because that would have been really fun.
Dude, that's been the consensus. It's blowing everyone's mind. Like talking about how they had to take turns with their brother or sister, and they could have played at the same time, and just nobody read the instruction booklet, I guess.
Was it in the instruction booklet?
I don't know. I don't have the fucking you would imagine, but
that's so weird. Like they would keep that a secret.
Yeah, it's crazy. It was just really funny to me that he like broke this news to the internet too, and everybody freaked out. It's like, how'd he find that out?
I think the story is, and I don't know if it's Seth Rogen, or I've heard a story like somebody like sat on a controller or something, and they noticed like the duck was in like a weird spot in the TV or something like that. I don't remember the exact details, but that's how I found out. Like I read a story about it. So yeah, I think that's how it happened.
Yeah, it's funny to me. It's like 30 years too late, but still pretty cool. And then the last story I have is that so far, Fortnite has been cited in over 200 divorces across the country.
Yeah, I saw that. It's funny that you brought that up. I saw that today, and that's a UK thing.
So is it? I thought it was.
Yeah, it was in the UK, which I believe it was like 5% of all the divorces. Because 200 sounds like a lot, but when you think of in the whole realm of things, it's really not that much. But it's pretty. I mean, I guess it's not funny, but I mean,
it's kind of funny.
It's kind of funny because if you're that much of a douchebag, like I play a lot of video games. My wife knows the deal though. Like she knew that when she married me. I think we got ourselves gifts. Well, not ourselves. We got each other gifts for our first anniversary, like when we first started dating. And her gift to me was like 3 video games. So one of them was Dante's Inferno, which I don't even know why I remember that, and Ultimate Alliance 2. And I don't remember what the third one was.
And obviously, you married her?
Ultimate Alliance was good, but Dante's Inferno not so much. But anyways, it wanted to be God of War so much. But I'm not going to get on a tangent about Dante's Inferno. Don't ever play it. But like she knew the deal. But like if you're that much of a douchebag that you can't stop playing a game to hang out with your wife or husband, then you have a fucking problem.
Yeah, I mean, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, so I can't really comment until Red Dead Redemption 2 comes out. But I would never get that sucked into a game like Fortnite. I can promise you that.
I mean, Fortnite's awesome. It's really, really fun. I get why people love it. I don't personally love it that much. Like, it's fun to play every once in a while. I don't even remember the last time I played it. Probably the last time we had a Fortnite Friday, which was like a month or 2 ago. So that was probably literally the last time I played it. Like, there's like a cube that's like going in the lake right now. Like, all this crazy shit's happening in that game that I have no knowledge of because I haven't played it in a while. So it's definitely weird that people love that game as much as they do. But I mean, it's a cool game. I enjoy it. I'm never going to get into that game like I get into other games.
Yeah, I mean, I like it too. I've never gotten sucked into it like that, where it was like a threat to my marriage. So, do you know the big craze right now is people doing the dances from Fortnite?
Yeah.
Can you do any of the dances from Fortnite?
I don't really dance, but it was kind of funny that you brought that up because I'm a big Bears fan, and they scored a touchdown, one of their wide receivers, Anthony Miller, and he did one of the dances from Fortnite.
Which one?
I don't know the names of them, man.
All right, conversation over. So that is all I have for Nerd News.
All right, so we are going to review the season 1 of Castle Rock, which is a Hulu exclusive series that we've discussed before on the podcast. It finished up a couple of weeks ago, so we're a few weeks behind, but that's kind of the per usual for shows, because it usually takes us a week or two to watch them, because we're not cool like these other review sites that get to watch it early. We get to watch it like everybody else. So, if you missed one of the episodes where we talked about this show, it's based in the Stephen King universe. It's not necessarily about one story in particular. It's kind of a collective of some of his stories. Castle Rock is based in Stephen King universe. Like, it's a town that he brings up quite a lot in Maine. I think there's only a couple of stories where things actually happen in Castle Rock. I think one of them is the Dead Zone that happens actually in Castle Rock. And of course, Shawshank Redemption also happens in Castle Rock because that's where the prison is. But essentially what this show is about is essentially a social outcast must return to his hometown to defend a John Doe who is discovered being held captive in a mysterious wing of the Shawshank prison. So like I said, we've talked about this show before. We're both fairly big Stephen King fans. I say fairly big because Tyler and I both admit that we haven't read a ton of his work, but the stuff that we have read is really, really good. So we've both been into the show. I mean, if you've listened to those past episodes, you know that we were liking what we were watching, but we were only a couple of episodes in. So obviously we would both have finished it at this point. So I was really excited for this show when it first came out. I didn't get to it immediately, but I did binge it with my wife, and it kind of will tell you a lot. My wife is not a Stephen King fan whatsoever. She's not really a horror fan. So I think she was into it almost as much as I was. So that kind of tells you how good we think this show was.
Yeah, so I think when I talked about this for what I was into one episode, it was 2 episodes in. So I talked about it very early in its run, and obviously a lot can happen in 8 episodes. So it sounds like you and Chrissy both loved it quite a bit. So I'm excited to get into the review and dive in.
Yeah, for sure. So if this is your first episode, we break down the reviews very similar to how we break down the episode in general. We like to do it in segments. And the first main segment that we do is kind of just a general overview. We call it Broad Strokes. So how'd you feel about season 1 of Castle Rock?
Overall, season 1 of Castle Rock was pretty good. It's not an amazing season of television in my opinion, but it gets the job done, and it's a really good appetizer for Shocktober for me. So I'm definitely in the Halloween spirit after watching it over the last few days. So for me, there were certain things that I had hoped this series would include, and even though I was disappointed it didn't meet those expectations, it did do something completely original, which I have to appreciate. With that being said, I mentioned it whenever I first discussed this for what I was into, that I was worried that Stephen King, the whole tie-in to his work would be a gimmick. And for me, that's exactly what it ended up being, which made it kind of cliche. But overall, pretty good season of television.
See, I almost kind of disagree with you as far as the gimmick is concerned. Yes, that's what pulled me into this show initially, but I think I was probably maybe 2 or 3 episodes in, and I kind of forgot about that. And I was just kind of pulled in by the show itself. Like every once in a while, I would see something and I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's right. This is based in the Stephen King universe. But after a while, I kind of just forgot about it. And maybe that's because, yes, I do consider myself a Stephen King fan, but I've only read maybe 3% of all of the stuff that he's done because he writes so much. But like, for example, I think it was like episode 5 or 6 where his kid gets on a train and he's supposed to go back to Boston, or maybe it was a bus. I think it was a bus. And he ends up stopping at Jerusalem's lot, which of course is another location within the Stephen King universe. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. We're watching this show that is based in this universe that I love. I just was more interested in the characters and the story itself. It is a slow burn, so I will give you that. But for the most part, I don't think, yes, it was the reason I watched this show initially, but it wasn't the only thing that kept me interested in this show. And I think that says a lot about the show, is that I kind of forgot about it after a while. Like, it wasn't the most important thing. And for me, if it's going to be that gimmick, it has to be the most important thing. And it really wasn't. at a certain point, I just kind of forgot about it and I was more interested in these characters. Now, like I said, it is a slow burn. And if that's not something that you're interested in, then you will definitely be bored with this show. And I'm going to get into the story here in the next segment. So I'll try to be vague with broad strokes, but I think that it does it in the right way. Yes, it's a little bit slow, and it was slow for me at times. There were a few episodes here and there that I was like, okay, let's get going. Let's pick up the pace a little bit. But I think it definitely builds this world in the right way. Very similar to how he writes, which I thought was pretty cool.
I think we're agreeing in different words. So
okay.
I agree.
We do that sometimes.
I agree that what they did was original, and I respect that. But you also pretty much defined exactly what a gimmick was, which was them using something like the Stephen King universe to lure you in, and then it not carrying any weight for the show.
But I don't think it... See, I think we're saying the same thing, but I'm giving it credit for that, and you're saying that that's a detriment to the show.
Not a detriment. I just think that it's cheap.
I don't know. I don't think so. Because yes, I am admitting that I wouldn't watch this show otherwise, but I'm glad that I did watch the show because I did enjoy it.
I still think we're agreeing in different words.
I just don't like the word gimmick. I think that's where I'm getting tied up on.
That's fine. So you ready to jump into story?
Yeah. How'd you feel about Castle Rock?
So I typically start with the positive and I end with the negative. And I don't like that order of things. So I'm going to try to do it the other way around with this one. So I'm going to start with my negatives. So my problem with this show and the story is that the story doesn't propel itself equally throughout the series. There's, like you said, a really slow build with this show up until episode 8-ish, where there's not really any clue as to what's going on, and I had a hard time believing that they'd be able to wrap up the show by the end of episode 10. The story is definitely too vague in some spots, and the mystery doesn't make things thrilling. It just makes things convoluted, especially in earlier episodes. In the spots where it's not being coy and vague, it's really good storytelling, though, which is why overall I like this season of television so much. But I will say it's littered with too much stuff that feels like they're trying to be cute, which doesn't equate to good storytelling in some places. So I also, just to kind of reiterate the Stephen King connection, I know we just kind of harped on that for a second, but from a story standpoint, for me, it adds nothing to this show or the mystery in this season of TV other than I recognize that from this book or I recognize that from this movie. That for me was really disappointing from a storytelling aspect. With that being said, there is a lot to love on the show. When things with the story are moving, it's really suspenseful television. Episodes 7, 8, 9, and 10 are great. And as puzzle pieces start to fall into place, it's a really fun ride. Again, the only problem I have is the amount of episodes it takes to get to that.
So I will definitely agree with a lot of what you just said. This reminded me, and I did a Nerd Year's resolution to try to give Lost a shot. I never watched Lost other than a few episodes of the first season, and I think my wife and I got through season 3, and I kind of just fell away from the show just because it was clear to me, and I've heard this going into the show, and I tried not to let it bother me, but it was clear to me that they had no intention of giving us any of the, like, they tease so much mystery in that show, and they have no intention of giving that to us, and I kind of felt a lot of that in this show, but eventually they give us the answers, or at least some of the answers. And so I kind of felt like this was almost the show that I wanted Lost to be. And so I was happy about that, this show didn't leave us hanging for the most part. But what I really liked about this, and I kind of teased a little bit of this in broad strokes, is it followed the similar format, and I'm sure that this isn't on accident, the way that King writes, it's not just about the mystery or the horror or whatever. It's really about the characters. And I think this show does a really good job of making these characters interesting. They're just not cardboard cutouts of people. Like he comes back to this town, and it could have easily just been about, oh, he's the guy that everybody thinks killed his dad. But he also has this neighbor that's a fucking weirdo that is can kind of read his mind, and his mom is kind of losing her mind, and his stepdad, sort of like the guy that his mom's boning, is also the guy that saved him when he disappeared. Like, there's so many different layers, and I think that's what good shows do, is that they don't make cardboard cutouts of characters that just do things to move the plot along, that they have all of these different layers to them. And I think this show does a really good job of layering these characters. Some of it doesn't work. I think the Jackie Torrance stuff I will agree with you. That's the one part of this show that felt gimmicky to me, is her inclusion, because I don't think she really does a whole lot in this show. And there's a couple that buy this house, and they kind of get their own episode. I want to say it was episode 5 or 6. And they kind of get a good chunk of that episode, and I could give two shits about this couple at all. And so that was a misstep for me. So it wasn't all perfect, but I will say that most of it was really good. There's even an episode, and we'll get to our notable episodes towards the end, but there was an episode that was just about Henry's mom. And I thought that was really, really cool the way they did that, and a really interesting episode. It was kind of a sidetrack, like it didn't really move the plot along, but it was so interesting, and it just, again, added that layer to the character that made it so much interesting, or the show so much more interesting to me. And then, unfortunately, and I'm kind of doing what you said you didn't want to do, which was end on a negative. It is a slow burn, like I said, in broad strokes, and I wanted it to get to the point, and then once it got to the point, or at least somewhat to the point, because obviously there's going to be more seasons of this show, and we're going to peel back some of those layers and further seasons, but I wasn't crazy about where it got to. Like, the point it was getting to, you get all of this mystery, and then you get some of it in episode, was there 10 episodes, or there's only 8 episodes? I think there was 10 episodes. You get a little bit of that in episode 9 or 8, and then the final episode was kind of a mess. I didn't really feel like, because there's some pacing problems, and because it's a bit of a slow burn, like, I felt like they could have, like, take out that couple that buys this house. Like, that's not important. Take that out and give me more of a build up, instead of just throwing everything into the last episode, because that kind of made the last episode a bit of a mess for me. But other than that, like I said, I think that this show followed this similar format, how King writes his books. It's more about the character than the mystery or the horror.
Cool. You ready for performances?
Yeah. How'd you feel about Castle Rock?
So, just kind of running through the main cast here, like, I don't have a ton of complaints. I think Andre Holland does a pretty great job of carrying the show. I'm not as familiar with his work. I haven't seen Moonlight, which I know he's best known for, and I just hadn't seen other things he has done, but I thought he did a great job. I thought Jane Levy was pretty good as Jackie Torrance, even though, like you said, her inclusion was kind of gimmicky. Sissy Spacek, she is a legend. So
she's so good in this.
Yeah, she could have easily joined this cast and phoned it in and been like, "Listen, I was in Carrie. Like, I know Stephen King stuff. I really don't need to try here." But she's probably the standout for me. She's amazing. Melanie Linsky plays Molly. I think she's hit or miss. I don't think she's great. I don't think she's terrible. She doesn't really add anything to the show for me, but it's not like a detriment to the show either. And then I don't know if this is going to be controversial or not, but I just do not think Scott Glenn is that great. There, I said it. There were some scenes where, as he delivered his dialogue, I cringed a little bit. And I felt the same way whenever he popped up in Daredevil in season 1 and season 2, and he was even in The Defenders. Like there are monologues where he's fine, but then there's other stuff where you can tell he's just kind of reading his lines, and it just doesn't sell for me. So I'm not a huge Scott Glenn fan.
Yeah, he's definitely one note. Like, he's only kind of, and I don't know if it's just because he's typecast or not, but he does feel like, especially at this point of his career, he's asked to do that stick character, and that's all he's asked to do, and that's basically what he is in this show. I don't necessarily totally agree with you that he was bad in the show. I didn't think he was amazing. He definitely gets overshadowed in a lot of his scenes, but I think that's more of a testament to, what was his name? Andre Holland, who plays basically the main character in this show. I thought he was amazing. I thought he really carried this show, and he had to because he's in almost the entire show. So I definitely agree with you with Melanie Linsky. She's just not good. Like, I don't think I've seen her in something that I'm just like, man, she was really good. Like, she just her performance was definitely underwhelming. Somebody that you didn't bring up, or at least I must have missed it, was of course Bill Skarsgård, who plays Pennywise in the It franchise, and so he definitely has ties to the Stephen King universe. He has just a creepy fucking face. Like, just his whole demeanor, he's a creepy looking fucking dude. And he plays that character so well. And I've seen him on like talk shows and stuff, and he seems like a really charming, like, just normal dude, but I've only ever seen him play these super creepy characters. And so he just has that demeanor to him. And there's literally an episode in this show where he just plays a normal guy. And it just kind of really just freaked me the fuck out to watch him. He doesn't do a bad job. It's so weird to see him play a normal fucking character, especially because it's later in the season and you've seen him basically be this creepy dude the whole time. And of course you see him as Pennywise in the It franchise. So it's really weird to see him play a regular dude. I don't think I've ever seen him, other than, like I said, in watching him like just be himself at talk shows. I don't think I've seen him in anything else that he's not just like that fucking creepy dude.
Yeah, I can't believe I forgot him. I was like going through the main cast and I forgot him. I think it's because for most of the show he delivers very few lines, and they definitely just rely on the creepiness of his face and his big ass eyeballs. So yeah, I agree. He's good at what he does for sure. I don't have any problems with him.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I pretty much agree with everybody else you talked about. There wasn't really anybody else that I wanted to bring up. So overall, I think that everybody did a pretty good job.
For sure, man.
All right. So normally we talk about like action or horror. I don't really think that this show necessarily has much of that. I would say like mystery. How'd you feel about the mystery in Castle Rock?
I feel like it just kind of goes back to the storytelling section for me. It's too slow of a burn. The mystery is too convoluted for too long. But again, once you get towards the back fourth of the season and things start to come together, I think that the resolution is pretty good up until the last 15 minutes of the season, kind of like you were saying. I don't appreciate where it went from that standpoint, and I know it's just to kind of set things up for a season 2, but I'd say like episode 7 through the first 3/4 of episode 10, the mystery really hits.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely agreed with that. Like I said, for me, it's more about the characters than it was for the mystery. Like I said, it got to the point because it is a slow burn that I really wanted them to get to the point. And then once they did, I was slightly underwhelmed, especially because, like I said, the episode 10 is kind of a mess. But yeah, overall, I think it's interesting. But like I said, characters are more important than the actual mystery itself. So with reviews of TV, we do like to pick out a couple of notable episodes. And for me, there's two really, really obvious ones, and I'm pretty sure we're going to pick the same ones. So why don't we just go ahead and like just say what our episodes are, and then we can kind of talk about each one of them.
So I know for sure we're going to pick one of the two are the same. I don't know about the other one. So I think we probably both picked episode 7.
Yeah, the Queen. Yep.
Yeah, which is the Sissy Spacek-centric episode. The other episode I picked was episode 8.
Okay, so I picked 9.
Cool. So, I mean, we could talk about let's just go in chronological order. So episode 7, cool. Like I said, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier, that's the episode where we see things kind of through the perspective of Sissy Spacek's character, Ruth. She is suffering from dementia, and we get this whole thing about how she leaves chess pieces in each room to remind herself if it's now or a flashback, those types of things. And it's a really well put together episode. Like it sounds like it could be really messy and really convoluted to kind of see timelines mixed matched and things kind of pieced together, but it really works. And then it also allows Sissy Spacek an episode to just kind of go crazy with her acting. And I mean that in all the best ways. Like, she completely carries the episode and she's great. And then it ends on a really good cliffhanger as well that I appreciated. So for me, it's the highlight of the season, and I really loved that episode.
Yeah, so I think the most important part that you brought up is the fact that she just basically gets to carry this episode, and she's so fucking good that I think with a lesser actress, you don't get as interesting of an episode. The way that they filmed it and kind of the structure where it bounces back and forth, you're not quite sure if she's in present or past or whatever, I think is interesting in itself, but it really, really hinges on her performance, and it's so cool. Like I said earlier, it is kind of a sidetrack. Like, it's not that important with what's actually going on, but it's such a cool episode. And like I said, it's a very Stephen King-esque thing to do. Make it more about the characters than it is about the show itself or the book in King's case. So I think it's just one of those episodes that does that so well. It makes it so important to this character that you get to see how she has to live her life. Her daily life is a struggle because she doesn't really know if it's past or present.
Absolutely, man.
All right, so episode 8.
Episode 8, I should have written down the title. I don't have it off the top of my head, but this
is I have them right now.
Oh, thanks.
It's Past Perfect is what it's called.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this is, I think, a place where we're going to disagree because you alluded to one of the threads of this episode that I really liked. It sounded like you didn't like it. So this involves the couple that moves to Castle Rock. And I will say the timing of this thread in the story is strangely late in the season. It's almost at the beginning of the episode, like just a one-off story about this couple that is having marital issues, and they move to Castle Rock for kind of a refresh, a new start, and they buy this house with the intention of capitalizing on all of the death and murder and intrigue surrounding Castle Rock, and they're going to make this themed bed and breakfast to like these murders that happen in the house they bought. And obviously, knowing the show, things go a little crazy and a little violent and a little horrific, and I would say that really piqued my interest the most in this season was because it doesn't really get like that in any other episode. Like, this is probably the goriest episode, I'd say, and I don't need gore to enjoy a show, but I do think that gore adds that horror element that I was looking for in this show that it kind of lacked. You mentioned that we talked about mystery instead of action or horror because it didn't really have those other two genres. So I liked that was weaved in because that's kind of what Stephen King is known for, is his horror writing. I actually think that there is room in Castle Rock to do more things like that. Since it's based on the works of Stephen King, I think you could do one-off episodes where it focuses a little bit more on a side story that doesn't have to tie into the main story and could even tie into some of Stephen King's work a little bit. So I liked that little detour, and yes, that ended up tying into the bigger story in a big bad way, but at first I thought it was a nice little break from all of the mystery concerning Bill Skarsgård's character.
So I like the point that you brought up, and you kind of explaining it does make me appreciate this little side story a little bit more. I still don't think that it's necessary in the whole scope of things, but I do like the point that you brought up that I think the reason I didn't like it as much as I did was because you get that little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of episode 7, and I feel like we were finally starting to get to the point, and then they have this weird side story. And if that had happened earlier in the season, I think I might have appreciated, because it's not a bad story by any means. It's really cool that these people would have like this dark tourism thing in this town that has this creepy past. Like, it's a really cool idea, and I think, like I said, that point is really good that you brought up, is I think I would have appreciated that story thread more if I wasn't like, okay, let's get into the real thing. And it just kind of felt like a side story, and it felt like it was delaying the point more and more. And we already kind of had a slow burn leading up to it. So that's, I think, a lot of my disappointment with that is tied to the fact that I was just like, okay, we're finally getting to it. And then we had to watch this 20 minutes of stuff that didn't seem like it mattered.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think you're right. I think it did come a little late in the season for it to carry more weight. But I do think, like I said, there's room on this show to do like a monster of the week type thing, which would be pretty cool. So, with that being said, you want to dive into episode 9?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll kind of take the lead on this one because you had to do it for the other 2 episodes. But basically, this is the episode where you finally get to the point, as I've been saying a lot in this review. And I don't want to talk in too much particulars, just because I think that if you're watching or if you're listening to this and you haven't watched this yet and you're interested in it, this is the big episode. Like, you get a little bit of resolution in the next episode, in the season finale. But I think for me, this is the biggest revelation that you get in the whole show. And it's pretty cool. I mean, I just love the idea, and it caught me so off guard, and especially because it's so, it fucks with your head so much, because all of a sudden you see this character as this one thing the entire season, and then all of a sudden it opens with you seeing him playing a completely different type of character, and you finally get a lot of your questions answered in this episode, and it's really just kind of a cool episode. So, I just really liked how this episode built the mythology of Castle Rock.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's hard to talk about this episode without spoiling anything, because this is basically, if this season of television was a penis, this episode would be the orgasm. Like, this is where they give it all to you. So
we've talked about penises too much on this.
I feel like we talk about penises on every episode. It's just more obvious because we talked about Batman's penis for so long. But either way, you're right. This is the episode where they got to the point. So it's one of the best of the season. I don't disagree.
For sure. And I failed to mention this, and this is going to seem out of the blue, and I'm actually blanking on his name, but I failed to mention that our boy from Fat Man on Batman actually is a writer on this show.
Mark Bernardin. He wrote episode 6, I believe, or co-wrote episode 6.
I thought that was really cool. I mean, he's a legit writer. Like, I forget that. And then he gets hired to do something that's really cool like this. Like, he writes in comics. He writes, I think he wrote for Entertainment Weekly for a while. Like, he wrote for Playboy, which is weird to say. But, yeah, so, I mean, he's a legit writer.
Yeah, and I liked his episode quite a bit, too, so.
For sure.
Cool, man.
All right,
ready for the star rating?
Yeah, so star rating out of 5 stars. What'd you feel about Castle Rock?
3.5.
Yep, 3.5 for me as well.
Okay, cool. So like I said,
all right, so what's nerd favorite this week?
So nerd favorite, it's probably pretty obvious. Like, it has to be Stephen King related. I'm sure we've done our favorite Stephen King yada 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 before, so I'll go a little bit deeper cut with this. Again, kind of like what Pat pimped last week. If you'd like to suggest a nerd favorite for this segment, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. But this week was all me, so I am going to ask you what Stephen King story you'd like to see either remade or adapted. So it can be a story that was already made into a movie or a television series that you'd like to see remade, or something that's never been adapted that you would like to see adapted. So for me, it's a little off the wall, especially since the original movie spawned like 6 or 7 sequels. But I think that there's more potential to Children of the Corn than what we got in that movie that came out in the late 80s, early 90s. I think the idea of a rundown small town that is basically led by children that killed their parents off is a pretty cool idea. And I don't know in the age of social media and all of those types of things how you'd make it believable, but I do think it's pretty creepy, and like the demonic nature of it all is pretty interesting, and it's something that I'd just like to see redone in a more horrifying way. I really love the short story. I believe it was in the book Night Shift, if I'm not mistaken, or it might have been in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. I can't remember, but I love the short story, and I liked that movie a lot when I was little. So I think that there's a more horrific way to tell it and to show it, and that a studio like Blumhouse could probably do it justice.
Yeah, I remember liking that movie when I was a kid. I doubt it holds up at all, so hence the remake. But yeah, I don't know how you would do that with cell phones and Twitter and that sort of thing. But I mean, I guess they could have just, oh, well, it's out in kind of like the boonies and you just don't get signal or something.
Yeah.
Like, just even if you just went really super simple like that. But yeah, I think if it was going to get remade, it probably would have already happened. I don't think that people think of Children of the Corn like we do, because it was a really, I wouldn't say good movie, but it was an interesting movie. I've never seen any of the sequels, so I can't really talk about them, but I never read the short story either, but I thought that the first movie was pretty interesting.
Yeah, man. So what's your pick?
So like I said, I've read, I would say, a lot of Stephen King, but relatively speaking to how much he's done, it's not a lot at all. And a lot of the stuff that I've read, it's already been adapted. So I can't go that route. My thing, and it's going to be kind of weird because I didn't really like the book. I think there's so much potential for The Dark Tower.
Yeah.
And the fact that we got this just bullshit of a movie, just dumpster fire. And I know our buddies from the Obsessive Viewer, they actually hated the Dark Tower movie so much that they started a new podcast called the Tower Junkies to like just talk about Dark Tower, how awesome the book series is, and basically just how awesome Stephen King is, because they were so angry that the Dark Tower got so many things wrong. And it was just so bad that I know that they're still talking about maybe potentially doing the TV show still, and I think that's probably the route that you need to go. If you're not planning on giving this movie at least 3 or 4 movies, I think you just go with the TV show. I think that's the way to go with a story like this, because I think there's like 8 or 9 books, and there was a lot of comic books as well that went along with this. So unless you think that this movie is going to do well enough to spawn 3 or 4 sequels, I think you just go with a TV show. And of course that movie was just garbage, so I think you just throw it out and just start over. But I don't know if it'll ever get done because it took so long for it to get done in the first place. It was in production hell for so long, and we didn't think we were ever going to get it, and then we finally got it, and it was just a shit show, and it didn't make any money. So I really doubt that we're ever going to see any more of the Dark Tower. But again, I didn't really like the Gunslinger that much, but I've heard that it's the worst of the books, so maybe I'll revisit it eventually. I just think that just judging by the fandom that book series has, I think we definitely deserve a better movie or a better TV show for it.
Yeah, I would love to see it done right. I'm not as super familiar with the source material as you are, or our friends at the Obsessive Viewer are, but I mean, obviously that movie was garbage, so I'd love to see it as a TV series for sure.
Absolutely. All right, so that is it for episode 208 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. Of course, we'd really appreciate if you would subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. We're on it. The rate and review really, really helps us out because there's a lot of TV and movie podcasts out there, and it kind of separates us from the pack. So if you're listening to this right now, please rate and review us on iTunes. You can also check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com, which is kind of the hub of the Nerds You're Looking For. It has everything on it that we do, including our podcast, or not our podcast, our YouTube channel. It does have a podcast as well, which I, of course, would love if you comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. You can also email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.